as I was reflecting over the readings, and of course the second reading is one that we hear at a lot of our weddings, and was kind of thinking, reading over those kind of slowly, because again, I think a lot of times when we hear that, we're like, oh, the love is patient reading, here we go, and we kind of, the temptation might be to zone out a little bit. And something jumped out at me later on in that reading, where St. Paul is saying, he says, at present we see indistinctly as in a mirror, but then face to face. What he means by that is what they used to use in the St. Paul's day for a mirror was like dark glass. They didn't have actual mirrors as we do today. So what he means by that is we see it's very fuzzy. It's very difficult to see what's really going on. It's really difficult to see God. It's almost like we can hardly see. It's almost a shadows type of thing if you imagine kind of looking at God through our glass bottle or something along those lines. He's saying, but then when we get to heaven, we'll see God face to face. We'll really understand fully what's going on. And that, I decided that I kind of wanted to talk about that and preach about that a little bit this weekend. And I've realized, I was thinking this being the Super Bowl week, and this sort of national audience and everyone gets, into the commercials and everything like that. And I thought, if I had one homily to preach to people, I think this is the homily that I would do. If the NBC came and said, hey, you've got 10 minutes, so go, I think this would be the one. And then I started thinking, well, if we raise $35 million, we can actually make this happen. So hopefully you'll be generous in the collection, and maybe we can pull some strings and actually get this on television during the Super Bowl. We'll see. But anyways, what I want to preach about this weekend, again, reflecting on St. Paul's words, and I want to start by saying something that I think will shock some people at first, but don't worry, I'll explain it. I would start by saying that we need to be able to admit and be able to say and understand what we mean when we say that the Catholic Mass is boring. The Catholic Mass is boring. And I mean that on the level of entertainment. The Catholic Mass is not entertaining in the sense that we typically think of when we say the word entertaining, and quite to the contrary. In fact, it's actually pretty boring. If you talk to people who aren't Catholic who come to a Mass, they're kind of like, wow, that was really painful. We think of the songs and the things that we, watch on television and the movies that we go see. There is no movie this weekend called the Catholic Mass. No one would pay to go see the Mass. It's not entertaining in that regard. But I want to say too up front, I'm going to explain this a little bit more. And I preached a similar homily at the parish I was at before in my first year of priesthood. And 3 years later, at my going away party, actually at St. Malachy last year, there was a woman who came up to me, and she gave me, thanks for, we'll miss you, Father. It was great having you. And she started crying, and she said, I still can't believe you think the Mass is boring. And I had crushed this person's soul, and I felt bad for that. I'm not saying that the Mass is bad, and I don't mean that, but I think, so hopefully you don't tune out and just in total shock that, oh my gosh, Father thinks Mass is boring, and you don't hear anything else that we're saying, because it's important. But again, I don't think it's bad. Obviously, I think it's great. I love the Mass. It's the source and summit of our salvation, and everything that I do in my life is geared towards the Mass, and I think there's no better place on earth to be. But I think we have to be able to talk to people about what we think the Mass is and what we think happens here, and be comfortable with that, because I think right now we're failing. I think we're failing to get the message out, and I think people have the wrong idea about what goes on here, and I think that's highly detrimental. Like to, again, looking at entertainment really quickly, when I listen to the radio all the time. I drive around, I'm in the car a lot, and I listen to the radio, I listen to music, I listen to sports talk radio, I watch television sometimes, I love good movies, I love a great book. All those things are entertaining. And there's nothing wrong with entertainment. Catholicism has always been a sort of jovial faith where, this idea of entertaining and having a good time. It's not, the Pope is not condemning Super Bowl parties tonight, it's great to get together with family and friends and have a good time and entertainment and all these things. That's all great. It's all part of, God's creation. God didn't create us to be miserable, to just give everything up and to just sort of sit in the ashes until we die. Entertainment is a good thing. But I think that, and the thing I'd like to associate with entertainment is kind of like what I like to call the warm fuzzies. When we're really watching something or involved in something that's entertaining, it stirs something in us. When we hear a good song, it's like, as a football player, when I would hear like a really energetic song, that kind of gets you fired up, like I would start to imagine, like running out of the tunnel at the Super Bowl or winning the national championship in football or something like that. When we're watching a really good movie, it pulls us in and we start to actually think about, being in there, and we get excited. It does something to us and we get this sort of emotional reaction. And that's fine. Again, that's not evil, it's not bad, it's okay. But the problem, I think, becomes when we start to think that the Mass should do the same thing for us. When we think that the Mass is supposed to do that for us as well. And again, let's look at what St. Paul says. St. Paul says, at present, right now, on earth, in our life, we see indistinctly. We don't see clearly. We don't see clearly. He's saying when we get to heaven, then we will see what's really going on. What that means, what he's saying is that what's taking place here at this altar and here in this Mass is beyond my senses. It's not something that I will readily grasp, like I will a great song that I'm listening to, or a great movie, or a great television show that I'm watching with my eyes. Those things I sense them with my five senses, and they draw me in, and they're entertaining, and they're good. St. Paul is admitting up front, what we're doing here is not something that we readily pick up with our senses. We do not understand the fullness of the Mass. We do not understand the full presence of God or Christ here at Mass. And St. Paul, very importantly, is pointing that out to us. And we have to A, understand that, and B, be okay with it. I think that's the really important thing. And this is why I would preach this to the entire country if I had the shot. Because it wouldn't be to say, to scold or anything like that, or to say, well, we're not getting it. We don't understand. No, that's not it at all. What St. Paul is saying, especially today, is actually really good news. Because a lot of people will come to Mass, or will come to our worship and our Mass here, and they'll say, they'll want it or wait for it to entertain them. And then when it doesn't, they'll leave and they'll think, well, either A, the church is doing something wrong there, or I'm doing something wrong because I didn't get the warm fuzzies there. And so I'm not going to come back. And so many people, I think this is probably one of the main reasons why there are 11,000 people in Brazil and there are 300 people that come here this weekend. Because a lot of people have given God a shot, but they thought, well, it didn't entertain me. And I didn't get the warm fuzzies. And so either I'm doing it wrong or they are, but either way, I'm not going to go back. And it's great news when we realize we're not doing anything wrong. It's great news when we realize it's part of God's plan, that we not necessarily always have the warm fuzzies. And I think that is a great news. Because, again, I think about my time when I was in the seminary, started going to daily Mass. I'd never really done that. But every day in the seminary we go to Mass. And I remember being there for about 3 months, and I finally walked into my spiritual director's office and I started crying. And I told him, I was like, I'm doing everything I can here. I'm really trying to get into this. And every time I receive the Eucharist, I'm really trying to pray really hard. And I'm not getting anything. I'm not feeling it. It was basically what I was saying. And he was like, oh, so you think you're supposed to feel something every time? And I said, yeah. And he said, That's not how it works. And that was great news. I thought I was wrong. I thought like either, God was mad at me, or I had really screwed up, or I don't know what, or I was doing it wrong. And to learn that the pressure is not on me to feel something every time I'm at Mass was an amazing revelation. And I think if people knew that, then they would be more likely to give God a shot. And it really kind of makes sense. I mean, the fact that it would be weird if God was completely understandable and graspable just with our human senses. Does God come down to us and speak to us in certain ways? Absolutely. But God is beyond our senses. So the idea that we would come here expecting to understand and get and feel something every time is really not at all what we've ever believed. And that's what St. Paul says. If we look at the top two reasons that people leave church, as in stop coming and don't go anymore, it's preaching and music. Preaching and music. And, I think about, I have a good story, I think, for each of those. For the preaching part, there is, when I was growing up, we went to Mass one time, and there was a deacon giving a homily. And he starts out his homily in the worst way possible. He says, okay, the longest I've ever preached is 17 minutes. Time me because I think I'm going to break that record. And he did. He tripled his record. And 53 minutes later, his homily was over. My grandmother is this cradle Catholic. She's been going, obviously, I think she's, at the time she was in her 70s, had never missed a Mass her entire life. And my grandmother, I looked up at one point during this deacon's homily, my grandmother is carrying on a conversation with the person sitting next to her, whom she had met during the homily. And she walked out, and she'd never spoken anything bad about a priest before or anybody in the church, and she was just like muttering under her breath about this deacon and everything like that. And then, with the music part, I remember too, I'm sure there were people at that Mass who, because of that homily, have never come back to Mass. And with the music piece, I remember I was assigned to a parish, a real small parish in southern Indiana. It might have been like a fourth of the size of our church. And there was, I go to this parish. I was assigned to kind of help on the weekends and just kind of learn parish life. Well, I go to the first Mass, and the organist, who was like Betty, and I think she was in her 90s, literally. And the music sounded like she had just sort of face planted onto the keyboard and was just kind of rolling around. I mean, I didn't even know organs could make that noise. And so I understand, from sort of an entertainment level, of why do preaching and music drive people away from the church? Why are those the top two reasons? Because those are the things that have the most potential to be entertaining and to stir our emotions up during Mass. Now, that's not to say, what I'm not saying is that preaching and music are not important. They are. I mean, from my end as a priest, I'm charged with the responsibility of making the homily and preaching as good as I can possibly make it. That's what the church tells priests to do. But again, last week we heard in the reading St. Paul saying not everybody has the same gifts, and so some people are good preachers and others are good teachers and others are good musicians and other people have other gifts. And so not every homily that we hear is going to be of the same quality, and in fact, some, despite the priest trying his best, are going to be quite awful. And the same with music. We're charged with trying to surround the Eucharist with the best music that we can possibly produce as a community, and to try our best and to pitch in and to make that an effort. But that's something that we're charged with. But that doesn't mean that if the preaching happens to be bad, or if the music happens to be bad, that somehow Jesus decides to not show up. He does. And that's the amazing thing. No matter how bad the homily is, no matter how bad the music is, No matter what the situations might be, no matter what my senses are telling me happen at Mass, Jesus comes. And that's why we come. You know, last week we talked about the Sabbath. You know, remember the Sabbath, the commandment. The great thing about that is it doesn't say honor the Sabbath and keep holy the Sabbath if the homily's good. And it doesn't say honor the Sabbath if the music does something for you. The commandment just says honor the Sabbath. Go to church. And again, I'm not saying that in any way to scold or to condone it. That's great news. That's great to know that when I come here, no matter what my senses tell me, I'm receiving Jesus. And Jesus shows up here. Despite what my senses tell me, that's what's going on. You know, we had benediction here yesterday, and the Latin hymn that we sing there, the Tantum Ergo, every time we have benediction. Well, the translation of that is so important. It is very much along the lines of St. Paul. We sing, when we sing that song, may faith supply what our senses fail to grasp. And that's it right there. May our faith supply what our senses fail to grasp. Have I had great experiences at Mass where my emotions were stirred and I thought it was heaven on earth? Yeah, I remember one time very clearly, 4th grade. I don't know why. I was happening to pay attention that day. I don't know what was going on. I remember very clearly the opening song, "The King of Glory comes the nation rejoicing," and the song had me going. I don't know why. I liked the song. And there was incense going, and I remember the servers and the light shining in the window, and I remember having this emotional, my senses were moved. And I bet we've all had a couple of those experiences at Masses before, or at prayer, or wherever it may be. Those are great. But the problem is many people, when they have them, they think when they come back next week and it doesn't happen, they think they're doing it wrong. And they think that God is mad at them or not blessing them like He did last week. St. Paul says very clearly to us to comfort us in those moments, we don't see clearly right now. Most of the time we don't see it. We don't sense it. And that's okay. May our faith supply what our senses fail to grasp. That should be our prayer all the time. I'm here week in and week out as a priest, not because of what my senses tell me is going on here, but because my faith tells me that there's something going on here. And that is good news, and we take good comfort in that. There is a study that shows that most people that leave the church, they leave, so again, we've talked before about how the second largest denomination in the United States is ex-Catholics. And what happens is oftentimes many people leave the Catholic Church because it's not entertaining. There's not an emotional reaction that is stirred up in them, you know? And so what they do is typically, most of those people that leave the Catholic Church will go to a place that's more entertaining. Maybe there's video screens up here, or there's a rock band that plays music that's more soul-stirring. Maybe the preaching is better, you know, and it's more fired up and, you know, whatever. They leave, so this study followed not just, many people again have talked about and studied the number of people that leave the Catholic Church, but this was a different study. It looked at not only the people that leave the church, where do they go, but they followed them for a period of years. And what they found was an overwhelming majority of people who leave the church go to these more entertaining places. But within 5 years, they leave religion altogether. And that's very important for us to understand. Because what happens is when we base it on our emotional reactions and our senses and all of these other things and whether or not it's entertaining, it doesn't last very long. And we may prefer something more entertaining to the Catholic Mass, but what happens is pretty quickly we realize that it shouldn't be about entertainment. Pope Benedict says that so amazing. It helped me so much when I read Pope Benedict saying this. He said, we don't want to be entertained. Ultimately, what we want, we know deep down in ourselves that when we come to Mass, we want something that's not on the same level of television or radio or movies, or that is just an emotional sort of drug. And that's a great way to think of it. It's sort of, people start to crave that emotional stuff. And Pope Benedict is very right in saying, we don't want that. There's something in us that tells us that God shouldn't be grasped by me. I shouldn't, if this is really Christ on the altar, then I as a human being should not totally get that. And that's why Pope Benedict makes this a very important thing in all of his writings and in his preaching as well. This idea that the Mass ultimately does fail on an entertainment level, and that's okay. And that's okay. At present, we see indistinctly as in a mirror. But someday, when we get to heaven, we will see it clearly and we will understand what is really taking place. We pray for that day. But until then, we pray for the strength to simply be comforted by our faith. And may our faith supply what our senses fail to grasp.